All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we are diving headfirst into survival gear
And
essentials.
we've got a mountain of source material to dig through.
Oh, we went all out for this one. I'm talking prepping checklists, beginner's guides, and even those super in-depth gear reviews.
Not to mention some really gripping firsthand accounts, which can be so valuable.
Exactly. And the goal, to help you understand, especially if you're just getting started with all this, how to actually build a survival kit that works for you.
You know, it's fascinating because even though all these sources are so different,
Mhm.
I mean, we've got everything from minimalist setups to folks who are planning for long-term, off-the-grid living. There's one thing they all agree on.
What's that?
It's that preparedness isn't just about the gear itself. It's about really understanding the why behind it all, the principles of survival.
I'm with you there. We're not just making a shopping list. We're figuring out what actually matters.
Right, like for instance, one source highlighted this water filter, the Sawyer Mini,
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
which can literally make even sewage-filled water safe to drink.
I mean, talk about a game changer and a disaster, right? Not only practically, but mentally, too.
Totally. Imagine being in a situation where your only water source is, well, questionable.
Yeah.
Being able to purify that could mean the difference between, complete panic and feeling like you have some control.
Absolutely. And speaking of control, did you notice how all the sources were in complete agreement about the top 3 survival priorities?
Water, shelter, and self-defense.
Classic trio, right. But I think what's interesting is how those needs are all connected.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously we all need water, but shelter, that can be just as important, especially if you're dealing with extreme weather. Exposure can be a huge risk.
Right, and then there's self-defense. I mean, you need to be safe and sound to use all that other great gear we're going to talk about.
Exactly. So you've got to prioritize all 3.
Okay, so let's break these down a little. That Sawyer Mini filter, I was super impressed by how tiny and lightweight it is.
And effective. Don't forget effective.
Oh, for sure. It seems like it really works. Gives you that peace of mind knowing you can have clean water no matter what's happening around you.
Right. It's not just about camping anymore. Think natural disasters, power outages, all sorts of things.
Yeah, good point. So having a reliable way to clean your water, pretty essential.
Absolutely.
Now, with shelter, things get a little more, well, complicated.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
We saw recommendations for everything from those simple survival tarps to heavy-duty cold weather tents.
And even those hammock tents, have you seen those?
Those are cool.
Yeah.
But how do you even choose?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of environment you think you'll be in and what your personal needs are.
Like, what if I'm in the woods versus out in the open or even in the mountains?
Exactly. Each of those might call for a different kind of shelter.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then there's personal preference, too. Some people really want comfort. Some prioritize being lightweight. There's no one right answer.
Okay, now for self-defense. This can be a bit of a sensitive topic,
Oh, yeah.
but the sources we looked at didn't shy away from it at all. I mean, we're talking bows and arrows, stun guns, tactical pens, even door armor.
It's interesting, right? Because self-defense really brings up strong opinions. Some folks are all about firearms. Others prefer those non-lethal options.
I'm more drawn to non-lethal stuff myself, like maybe pepper spray or a stun gun.
Yeah, it's about finding what feels right for you, what you'd actually be comfortable using.
Okay, so we've covered the big 3. Water, shelter, self-defense.
The survival trifecta.
But there's a lot more to survival than just those basics.
So true.
Let's talk about fire. It's kind of primal, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the sources all emphasized how important it is for warmth, for cooking, even for signaling and boosting morale.
And there are so many ways to start a fire now. We saw the classic ferro rods, waterproof matches.
And those fire-starting shoelaces, I'm so curious about those.
Those are pretty clever. Got to give them that.
It's like having a hidden survival tool right on your feet.
Exactly. Sometimes it's about adapting and using what you have on hand.
Okay, this is where I get excited, tools.
Oh, yeah.
The sources mentioned so many options, multi-tools, credit card tools, even bolt cutters, for those times when you need to get past an obstacle.
Those can come in handy, that's for sure.
What are your must-have tools?
I'm always going to advocate for a good multi-tool, first and foremost. It's like having a whole toolbox in your pocket.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. Sometimes you need something specific, like those bolt cutters, to get through a fence or a jammed door.
Right, it's about having the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about rescue and communication, because we can't just assume someone's going to find us, right?
No, definitely not.
Yep.
Signaling for help is crucial. Even a simple whistle can be heard much farther than your voice, especially out in the open.
I always keep one in my hiking pack.
Yeah, smart move. Everyone should.
Now, when it comes to communication, especially if there's a wider emergency going on,
Mhm.
cell phones, they're not always reliable.
Right.
The sources really stressed the need for alternatives.
Like survival radios.
Yes,
Yep.
and even AM radio.
Which can be really powerful for long-distance communication.
What are your thoughts on those?
So survival radios, especially those with a hand crank for charging, those are essential.
I saw one called the Eaton Microlink that looked pretty good.
Yeah, that's a popular one. It's compact, it's tough, and you can even use it to charge your phone if you need to.
Now, HM radio, that seems a little more, I don't know, advanced.
It does have a learning curve, but the potential is incredible for getting news, connecting with other survivors, even just chatting with folks who share your interests.
That makes sense.
And there are tons of resources out there if you're interested in learning more.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Water, shelter, self-defense, fire, tools, rescue, communication. It's a lot.
But I think what's becoming clear is that building a survival kit is more than just checking off items on a list.
Totally.
You got to understand how it all fits together, what works for you, what you're actually comfortable using.
I think what's most important for me out of all these, it's those alternative communication tools.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
Because in a crisis, being able to get information and connect with others, that feels crucial. But I've got to say, those fire-starting shoelaces are just so cool.
Uh-huh. All right, I'll give you that. They are pretty cool. Preparedness doesn't have to be all serious, right? There's room for a little fun.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the cool stuff. Now let's talk about something practical, something the sources emphasized a lot, and that's first aid.
Right, because having the gear is one thing, but knowing how to use it, that's another story altogether.
Right, and first aid, that's your first line of defense for dealing with injuries, big or small.
And the sources covered everything from basic bandages and antiseptic wipes to pain meds, all the way to those heavy-duty things like blood clotting sponges and tourniquets, for those worst-case scenarios.
It's about being prepared for anything. You never know what you might face.
So be honest, have you ever had to use your first aid skills in a real-life situation?
Let's just say I'm very thankful for the training I've had. Reading about it is one thing. Doing it under pressure is completely different.
That's a good reminder to practice, right?
Absolutely. And first aid, it's not just about physical stuff either. The sources talked a lot about mental and emotional first aid, dealing with shock, hypothermia, even the emotional trauma that comes with these kinds of situations.
Right. It's about the whole person, not just the physical injuries.
Exactly. You got to think about the whole picture.
Okay, this brings up something else that's so important for survival in the modern world. Power.
Oh, yeah. Power and energy.
We rely so much on electricity.
All the time.
But imagine what happens when the grid goes down.
You're in a whole different world.
The sources highlighted solar chargers and battery packs as being really key for a survival kit.
Absolutely. You need a way to keep your essential devices running.
What should people keep in mind when they're picking out these kinds of devices?
Capacity is huge. That's measured in milliamp hours. Or, you got to figure out how many devices you need to charge and for how long. Portability is important too.
Right, because some of those solar chargers are surprisingly small and light.
Yeah, ideal for a bug-out bag or even just everyday carry. And we saw a couple of brands mentioned a lot, Anchor and Goal Zero.
Those are good ones. And it's cool that some of those old school methods haven't completely gone away either, like hand crank radios.
Yeah, those are super reliable.
Sometimes the simplest things work best. But having power is one thing. You need information, too.
Right. That's where those survival radios we talked about earlier come in.
Exactly. And ham radio for long-distance communication. It's a lot to think about.
It is. It all ties back to that idea of being resourceful, being adaptable.
Totally. What other alternative power or communication methods come to mind for you?
I've always been fascinated by human-powered generators.
Yeah.
Like pedaling a bike to charge a device.
That would be pretty cool.
And there are even portable wind turbines designed for off-grid use. Technology is constantly evolving.
So many options.
It's amazing what people come up with.
Okay, so this deep dive has been a real eye-opener so far. We've gone from basic gear to thinking about all these different ways to be prepared.
It's more than just the stuff, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's about the mindset, the skills, the whole approach.
Well said. And it seems like the journey is just beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
Building a survival kit is a personal thing.
Definitely. What works for one person might not work for another.
You got to figure out what makes sense for you.
Exactly.
As we keep going through all these survival guides and tips, I'm really struck by how resourceful people can be.
Oh, for sure, especially when it comes to shelter.
Yeah, those beginner guides we were looking at, they had some really clever ideas for making use of what you've got around you.
That's the heart of survival, right? Adaptability. You can't always have the perfect gear, so you've got to be able to improvise.
I remember those tips about using natural features like, a rock overhang or even a fallen tree as part of your shelter.
Exactly. Those can be great starting points.
And they even talked about digging a snow cave if you're in a winter situation to stay warm.
Which can be surprisingly effective.
It's amazing what you can do with a little knowledge and some creativity.
Right, and when you understand those basic principles, that's when you're really empowered.
Yeah, it's like a whole different way of thinking.
Totally. Instead of just being like, oh no, what do I do? You're like, okay, what have I got here? What can I work with?
You become a problem solver.
Exactly.
And that kind of thinking applies to more than just shelter, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think about finding water in the wilderness.
Yeah, that's a big one.
The guides had some really interesting methods for that. Did any of them stand out to you?
I was fascinated by the part about using animal tracks to find water.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
They said that if you see a bunch of animal trails converging, they often lead to a water source.
It makes sense. The animals know where to go.
It's like using their wisdom to your advantage.
We're all part of the same ecosystem, right?
Exactly.
So why not learn from those who've been navigating it for much longer than us?
I like that. And when you do find water, making sure it's safe to drink, that's crucial.
Absolutely. We talked about those portable water filters earlier.
Yeah, those are a game changer.
But the guides also emphasize the importance of having backup methods.
Like boiling the water.
Yeah, or using purification tablets.
It's like having insurance.
Redundancy is key in survival. What if your filter breaks or you just run out of tablets?
Oh, good point.
You don't want to be stuck with no way to get clean water.
Okay, let's talk about food. I'm curious about foraging, but honestly, it seems a little intimidating.
I get that. It's definitely a skill that takes time and knowledge to develop.
Those beginner guides had some info on edible plants, but they also stressed making absolutely sure you've identified them correctly.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to be messing around with that.
One wrong berry and uh-oh.
It's about being cautious and respectful.
What other ways of getting food did the guides mention?
Well, there's fishing, of course, even if you have to make your own tools.
Oh, right.
Setting traps for small game. And they even talked about hunting, using a bow and arrow.
Wow, that's next level stuff.
It is. But it speaks to our capacity to adapt.
Imagine being able to provide for yourself and your family when there's no grocery store around.
It's a powerful feeling.
It is. But all this talk about gear and skills, it's important to remember the mental and emotional side of survival, too.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about it before, but it bears repeating. In a long-term survival situation, your mindset, your attitude, that can be just as important as food and water.
Totally agree. This whole deep dive has really shown me how multifaceted survival is.
It's not a one-dimensional thing.
It's about being resilient, resourceful, being able to adjust to whatever comes your way.
Exactly. And realizing you don't have to go through it alone. We talked about community resilience before.
Yeah, I like that part.
It's so important. In a widespread disaster, the people who have prepared, they can be a lifeline for others.
It's a powerful idea, shifting from me to we.
Right. From individual survival to the well-being of the whole group.
And a strong community that's a safer community, too.
Absolutely. We can all help each other out.
Okay, let's circle back to signaling for help for a minute.
Okay, good idea.
We talked about mirrors, signal fires, those emergency beacons. What really stuck with you there?
I was really impressed by some of those ground-to-air signaling techniques. Using bright colors to make a message that rescuers can see from above.
Oh, yeah, like those big SOS signs.
Exactly. Sometimes the simplest ideas are the best.
It's about thinking outside the box, right?
Totally. And those emergency beacons, the PLBs, those are amazing, using satellites to send your location.
Especially if you're out in the wilderness where there's no cell service.
Yeah, a lifesaver. But like we said before, redundancy is key. It's always good to have multiple ways to signal for help.
Okay, I've got to ask, what do you think about those survival TV shows? Where they're building crazy shelters and making tools out of nothing?
Oh, yeah, those are fun to watch.
Do you think those skills are actually useful in a real survival situation?
Well, I think there's definitely some entertainment value there. And some of what they do is pretty extreme.
Yeah.
But the core ideas, those are solid. Resourcefulness, adaptability, figuring out how to solve problems with what you've got.
It's like those MacGyver moments.
Exactly. using a paperclip and some chewing gum to save the day.
I love it.
It's about seeing the potential in everyday objects.
Okay, before we move on, I want to touch on first aid again. We said earlier that having a well-stocked kit is great, but knowing how to use it is crucial.
Couldn't agree more. You're your own first responder in a survival situation.
Especially if help is a long way off.
Knowing how to stop bleeding, treat a wound, deal with those common medical issues, that can be the difference between life and death.
And those beginner guides, they covered a lot of the basics, like how to clean and bandage a wound, how to do CPR, even how to splint a broken bone.
It's amazing how much you can do with even a basic understanding of first aid.
Right. And it's not just about physical injuries either. The guides talked about dealing with shock, hypothermia, even the emotional trauma that can come with these kinds of events.
It's about the whole person.
Mind and body.
Exactly. You can't neglect either one.
This brings up another important point, protecting your home.
Oh yeah, our homes are our sanctuaries.
Exactly. And in a disaster, they become even more important.
They're our refuge. We saw all those recommendations for reinforcing doors and windows, having a plan for securing your property.
Some folks were even talking about creating a safe room, a specific place in your home that's designed to be a shelter.
That can be a really good idea, especially if you're in an area that's prone to certain types of disasters.
Like tornadoes or hurricanes.
Exactly. Having that designated safe space can provide a lot of peace of mind.
I like that. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, right?
No, not at all. Even a small closet or a basement area can work.
Okay, now I'm curious about those prepper checklists we were looking at. Some of that stuff seemed pretty intense.
Oh yeah, those can be quite comprehensive.
They covered every imaginable scenario, it seemed like.
Well, they're designed to be that way, to get you thinking about all the possibilities.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. But remember, they're a starting point. You don't have to do everything on the list.
That makes me feel better.
You figure out what makes sense for you, your family, your situation.
Where do you even begin with something like that?
I always say start with the basics.
Okay, like what?
Food, water, shelter, first aid, a way to communicate, some basic tools. Those are your foundation.
Get those in place and then build from there.
Exactly. You don't have to do it all at once.
One step at a time.
And, you know, what I think this whole deep dive has shown is that preparedness isn't just about surviving a disaster. It's about being able to thrive afterward.
I love that. It's about bouncing back even stronger than before.
Exactly. It's about having what you need, knowing what to do, and having the mindset to adapt and rebuild.
That brings up another point, something we talked about earlier, the role of community.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
I think it's worth emphasizing again.
Definitely. In a really bad situation, those who have prepared, they can be a lifeline for their neighbors, their community.
It's about sharing what you have, helping each other out.
Exactly. It's not just about me. It's about us.
And a community that works together, that's a community that's going to recover faster and stronger.
Absolutely.
You know, this deep dive has been quite a journey.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground.
From the basics of gear to the power of the human spirit.
It's all connected.
The gear, the skills, the mindset, the community, it all weaves together. And at the end of the day, it's about feeling empowered.
That's what it's all about. Not living in fear, but feeling confident that you can handle whatever comes your way.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this incredible deep dive into survival gear essentials.
It's been a pleasure exploring all this with you.
Likewise. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this journey. We hope you learned something new, got inspired, and maybe even feel a little more ready to face whatever challenges come your way.
Until next time, stay curious and stay prepared.
It's amazing how this whole survival gear thing has kind of taken us on a detour into, like, the human mind.
Oh yeah, the mental side of survival is huge.
I mean, all those sources we've been looking at, they don't just focus on the gear, they talk about the psychology of it all.
And that's so important because you can have all the tools and skills in the world, but if you panic in a real situation, it's not going to do you much good.
Totally. The sources talked a lot about things like visualization and mindfulness.
Those are really powerful techniques for building that mental resilience.
Even just having a positive attitude can make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. Your mindset plays a huge role in how you deal with stress and challenges.
It's like that saying, your mind is your most powerful weapon.
I love that. And the cool thing is, you can train your mind just like you train your body.
So true. They talked about mentally rehearsing different survival scenarios.
Yeah, like imagine yourself in a specific situation. What would you do? What resources would you use?
If you've already thought about it, it might not feel so overwhelming if it actually happens.
Exactly. It's about building those mental pathways so you're not starting from scratch in a crisis.
And the sources also talked about situational awareness, not just for survival, but for everyday life.
Being aware of your surroundings, noticing potential risks, it's a valuable skill no matter where you are.
Like if you're walking down a dark street at night, or even just navigating a crowded store.
It's about being present, being observant.
It's about being proactive, not reactive.
I like that. And, speaking of being proactive, one of the things that stood out to me was the idea of having a safe room in your home.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Like a designated space that's specifically designed to provide shelter and security in a disaster.
Exactly. Imagine having a room stocked with supplies, maybe some communication equipment, even just basic comforts to help you and your family get through a tough situation.
It's like creating your own little haven.
A place where you can feel secure and focus on what you need to do.
And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate, right?
No, not at all. Even a small closet or a section of your basement could work.
Okay, now I want to talk about those prepper checklists we were looking at. Some of that stuff seemed pretty, well, intense.
Oh, yeah. Those can get pretty detailed.
They covered everything imaginable. Natural disasters, economic collapse, you name it.
Those checklists are designed to be comprehensive, to get you thinking about all the possibilities. But it's important to remember that they're a starting point. You don't have to do everything on the list.
That makes me feel better.
You figure out what makes sense for you, your family, your location, your budget. It's all about personalization.
So where do you even begin with something like that?
I always say, start with the basics.
Okay, what kind of basics are we talking about?
Food, water, shelter, first aid, a way to communicate, some basic tools. Get those core elements in place, and then you can build from there.
One step at a time. Don't try to do everything at once.
And what I think this deep dive has really highlighted is that preparedness isn't just about surviving a disaster. It's about being able to thrive in the aftermath.
Yeah, it's about bouncing back, even stronger than before.
Exactly. It's about having the resources, the skills, and the mindset to adapt, to rebuild, and to create a new sense of normalcy.
And that brings us back to the importance of community. We've touched on it a few times, but I think it's worth emphasizing again.
Absolutely. In a widespread crisis, those who've prepared are in a much better position to help others.
It's about sharing what you have, supporting each other, and working together to rebuild.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
I love that. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this incredible journey into the world of survival gear and preparedness.
It's been an amazing conversation.
We hope you've learned some valuable tips, gained a new perspective, and maybe even feel a little more empowered to face whatever challenges come your way.
Remember, preparedness isn't about living in fear. It's about taking control and feeling confident in your ability to handle whatever life throws at you.
So true. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Stay curious, stay prepared, and remember, we're all in this together.